Hi, I received some feedback on the last video that I was hopping around the country too much, so I've decided to look at sites in particular regions one by one. I'm starting with Wellington, the capital of New Zealand, named after the Iron Duke himself. In my choice of archaeological sites to feature, I've given preference to ones that people in Wellington can actually go and visit, and appreciate them on the ground. Wellington is located at the southern end of the North Island, and it has quite a spectacular harbour. At the harbour mouth there are a pair of lighthouses, the oldest of which, located at the top of the cliff, is Pankara Lighthouse. It's New Zealand's first permanent lighthouse. It was a prefabricated kit set made in Woodside Ironworks in Dudley, England, and assembled on the windy, exposed location to guide ships away from the dangerous and rocky coastline around Wellington Harbour. It turned on its light for the first time on the 1st of January 1859. The lighthouse is currently owned by Heritage New Zealand, and is accessible to the public if you're up for a hike, with plenty of information panels scattered around. On the other side of the harbour mouth we have Watts Peninsula, a green area not yet swallowed up by the urban sprawl of the city. A number of interesting historic places and archaeological sites are located here. The peninsula was once a Maori stronghold, and traces of terracing, midden and a pa, Mataki kai poinga, remain. The Russian scare in the 1880s triggered a wave of fortification around New Zealand harbours, and coastal defence batteries were established here to defend the harbour entrance. The largest of which was Fort Ballance here, with Fort Gordon nearby, another emplacement here at Cow Point, and the final one on Point Halswell, which is now occupied by the mausoleum of William Massey, who was the Prime Minister of New Zealand during the First World War. The memorial has an interesting design that made use of the round gun pit for the 8-inch Armstrong disappearing gun that was emplaced there. At the time of making this video, much of Watts Peninsula is still Defence Force land, but the Massey Memorial is accessible to the public. If you move up the ridgeline, you can see concrete emplacements for anti-aircraft defences from the Second World War, a feature that several of the prominent hills around Wellington have. Just south of these, you can see Google has captured one of Peter Jackson's movie sets. This terrace was used in The Lord of the Rings, King Kong and The Hobbit. Prior to being a movie set, however, this was the site of Wellington's Women's Reformatory, and before that, a barracks for the troops stationed at the forts. Looking out over the city itself, Wellington, like almost every city in the world, is built on earlier incarnations of itself, with archaeological remains buried under its buildings and streets. Wellington's street layout is a little odd, as it was drawn up by the New Zealand Company in the UK without full knowledge of the topography. As a result, it struggles to conform to the hilly terrain a bit. Wellington has suffered a few very severe earthquakes over the years, and in many ways the city is shaped by the fact it's built on a fault line. In 1848, the new city was violently shaken by a 7.5 magnitude quake centred in Marlborough in the South Island, and it lost many new brick and stone buildings, while the wooden buildings were unharmed. Then in 1855, a massive 8.2 earthquake, the most powerful ever recorded in New Zealand, rocked the region. Again, the wooden buildings survived relatively unscathed, losing their chimneys for the most part, while masonry buildings were badly damaged or completely destroyed. As a result, New Zealand still makes heavy use of timber buildings, where in Europe the same building would be made of brick or stone. The old government building, now in the Victoria University Law School, was built in 1876, and is an excellent example of that. It was the second largest wooden building in the world until 1998. The 1855 earthquake changed the landform dramatically. Land shifting 18 metres, which is 59 feet horizontally along the fault, and in some places lifting up by 6 metres, which is roughly 20 feet. This turned what was seabed into boggy yet solid land, and swampy land into viable flatland. The hull of the Canadian ship Inconstant, a ship that spent its sailing life bringing immigrants to Australia, was turned into a wharf on the Wellington waterfront in the early 1850s, and used by Wellington businessman John Plummer as a customs store and ship's chandlery, known as Plummer's Ark. Plummer's Ark was certainly high and dry after the earthquake, and as Wellington worked to reclaim more and more land from the harbour, it was gradually swallowed by the growing city. The Ark was demolished in 1883, and covered by what is now known as the Old Bank Building. During the 1990s, when the Old Bank Building was being converted into a shopping complex and earthquake strengthened, the remains of Plymouth's Ark were discovered under the building and excavated by archaeologists. The majority of the anaerobically preserved ship was carefully documented and dismantled, taken away for wood conservation in Peg, leaving a small section under the bank. The parts that were taken away have sadly been abandoned before the conservation could be completed. But anyone visiting the bank can find a display of artefacts and interpretation about the Ark under the stairwell in the main building, and also in the underpass that connects it to the B&Z building on the opposite corner. Another archaeological discovery made in a building development, and now accessible by the public, is Te Aro Pa. Remains of some of the huts from the Maori village were discovered during the earthworks for the foundations of a new hotel building in 2005. Te Aro Pa was one of the Te Atiawa villages in the Wellington region when the first New Zealand Company ship, the Tory, arrived in 1839. Te Atiawa are a Taranaki Maori iwi, which is the Maori word for tribe, who were part of Te Raupraha's tribal alliance, who in 4 heke, a term for mass migration, between 1822 and 1834, had conquered the Wellington region. This was part of the Musket Wars that were only just ending at the time of the Tories' arrival. The alliance migrated from Taranaki because of raids from the north, particularly by Waikato Maori. Te Raupraha had a more strategic reason for moving his entire iwi 300 kilometres south. He wanted a stronghold where he could encounter more European ships and trade to get more muskets and gunpowder. He would then use this stronghold as a base to launch an invasion of the South Island. Tied up in the Musket War story is Matu Somes Island, in the middle of the harbour. This island has many archaeological sites relating to Maori occupation all over it, as well as more World War II anti-aircraft defences, a World War II naval degaussing station, and a former quarantine station. It was also the site of the takeover of the brig Lord Rodney in 1835 by a force of 900 Maori of the Ngāti Mutonga and Ngāti Tama iwi, who were also Te Raupraha's allies that invaded the region. They convinced the captain, they gave him an offer he couldn't refuse, to transport their people and 7 waka, which are canoes, varying from 35 to 60 foot in length in 2 loads, all the way out to the Chatham Islands. The Chathams were occupied by a peaceful, isolated Maori group called the Moriori, and a few European sealers, whalers, and missionaries. The heavily armed, battle-hardened Maori forces proceeded to conquer the islands for themselves in an invasion that could be best described as genocide. And the 2 iwi were at war with each other when the New Zealand Company ship arrived in the Chathams in 1840. Matu Somes Island is now a Department of Conservation reserve, and accessible via a ferry from the city. Moving north, we come to the site of Petone village, another Te Atiawa village site, which is now the suburb of Petone. This was where the New Zealand Company first arrived in Wellington and negotiated the sale of the city. The original plan was to settle the land nearby in the Hutt Valley in a settlement called Britannia, but the low-lying land was quickly flooded by the Hutt River, so the settlement moved around the coast to the site of the current Wellington city. Following the 1855 earthquake, the uplift made far more of the Hutt Valley viable for farming and settlement. The Petone Settlers Museum is located just down the coast here. Near to Petone we have the suburb of Johnsonville, where a major road runs northwards, originally constructed by British troops who built forts on hills along it, allowing them to communicate through to their headquarters at Mount Cook in Wellington City. This chain of forts leads to Paotahanui. This peninsula on the north coast of the Paotahanui Inlet is called Motukairangi Point. It was the site of a Ngāti Toa Pa, built by Te Rangi Hayata's forces during the Wellington campaign of the New Zealand Wars in 1846. Te Rangi Hayata was Te Raupraha's nephew and second-in-command. A party of sailors from HMS Calliope, led by Midshipman McKillop, modified the longboat of the shipwrecked bark Tyne. They fitted it with a 12-pound carronade and a brass swivel gun, with tightly rolled blankets and hammocks packed around the sides for cover. On the 17th of July, they took this little gunboat and entered the harbour, raking Motukairangi with canister shot. They had to get close to the shore for this to be effective, and Te Rangi Hayata and his warriors charged the little boat in the shallows, avoiding the fire arc of the 12-pounder. MacKillop tried to fire the swivel gun at Te Rangi Hayata, only to have it blow up in his face, cutting his face, burning off his eyebrows, and temporarily blinding and deafening him. Musket balls fired by the Maori punched through the side of the boat, but were stopped by the dense padded sides. The crew of the gunboat beat back the warriors, and were once more able to bring the 12-pounder to bear on them, raking them with canister shot, and finishing the engagement by firing some round shot into the retreating Maori. Te Rangi Hayata abandoned this position and moved to a new site further inland, safe from such an attack. A British redoubt would be built on this point named Fort Strode, which was bulldozed in World War II when Motukairangi Point was transformed into a huge camp for US Marines, who were training in New Zealand for the Pacific Theatre. St Albans Anglican Church in Petone was completed in 1898. It sits on the site that Te Rangi Hayata moved to after being attacked by MacKillop's gunboat, and was called Mataitawa Pa. In the early morning of the 22nd of July, a force of sailors and troops, led by MacKillop, kidnapped Te Raupraha from his pa at Plymouton. He'd be held hostage by Governor Grey, and eventually ransomed in exchange for much of Ngāti Toa's land. Rather than storming Mataitawa from the front, a force of troops and Te Atiawa warriors used the Maori trail that connected Mataitawa with the Hutt Valley, and approached it from the rear. Mataitawa was evacuated without a fight and converted into a British post. The last place on my tour of Wellington archaeological sites is Parramatta Barracks, a stone fortress built at the harbour mouth in 1847 after the conflict had ended to secure the harbour. Prior to this, an earthwork redoubt and later a stockade had been at the site. Parramatta Barracks was a complete white elephant. In the absence of Royal Engineers, the fort was designed by a local surveyor and constructed by a local builder, and it shows the inherent problems with putting projects to tender. The towers were designed to contain small cannons, which when test-fired, shook the building so much no one dared to fire them again. The main fireplace backed on to the main powder magazine, heating up the wall to a dangerous degree, at one point setting a section of the wooden floor on fire. The 1848 earthquake severely damaged the building, and the troops took to staying in huts outside, and used the stockade they had at the site previously. Finally, in 1855, the huge earthquake completely demolished the top story, and damaged the rest beyond repair. The ruins are still visible, and can be visited at the marina in Ngāti Toa Domain. I hope you enjoyed this sample of the archaeological sites of the Wellington region. Feel free to suggest what part of the country we should visit next. Thanks for watching, and please like, comment and subscribe. Cheers!